Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Books and Books. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Steve Moss. On behalf of everyone here and those watching online, we welcome you to the bookstore. While you are silencing your cell phones, please take a look at our Books and Books newsletter. This will give you a wonderful synopsis of all the great events we have coming up at Books and Books every night of the week here. You can always go online and give us your email address as well, and we can send you email blasts of everything so you don't miss everything. And you will also see that by these lights and cameras, we are live streaming tonight's event, as we do many of our events here. While we prefer to have you here in the store, you can always order your books online. We'll ship it to you in the U.S. for free, and you can call the store or give us an email, and we can ask the questions of the author while he is here. But tonight is tonight, and we are very pleased to have back with us a Books and Books favorite, James Grippando, and his latest Jack Switek thriller, Black Horizon. In this installment, the Miami attorney finds himself in the middle of an international legal battle over a Cuban oil spill that sets him on a deadly mission. James Grippando was a trial lawyer for 12 years before he became a full-time writer. He loves writing, so it's hard for him to think of it as a job. By the time it takes me to finish telling you all of the titles he's written, they would have found that Malaysian airliner. So I will just tell you that he is the author of, among others, Blood Money, Need to Know, Afraid of the Dark, Money to Burn, Intent to Kill, Born to Run, Last Call, and Lying with Strangers. And that's just a few, but we do have them all here in the store. Please give a warm welcome to James Grippando.
It's the first time we've done a live stream, and that's pretty exciting because this is sort of a landmark year for me. My very first book signing ever was 20 years ago this year at the old Books and Books. Who remembers the old Books and Books? Okay, yes, across the street. So it really is come a long way, and I guess the best thing about the live stream is now we actually start on time. So even better. It's funny because I remember, for those of you who don't know me, there weren't many people who didn't know me, by the way, in 20 years ago at that. I think we had a crowd much bigger than this one even, but there were probably 3 people in there who were not related to me, which is sort of the way the first novel goes. And I can still remember sort of getting the excitement of that first novel coming out. It was called The Pardon, never intending it to be a series. And now Black Horizon is my 21st novel overall, 21st novel in 20 years, and the 11th in the Jack Switek series. So tell you a little bit about Jack. He started in The Pardon as a criminal defense lawyer who defended death row inmates. His father was the law and order governor of Florida who signed their death warrants. And so it was this great father-son clash. And I had thought the book had resolved itself completely. And then we came into the era of this strange thing called email. And I got a lot of them in around the mid-90s from people saying, whatever happened to Jack? He was a very interesting character. He was only 26 years old in The Pardon. And I wrote 5 novels. Thinking I would just leave him behind. And then I came back with a book called Beyond Suspicion in 2002. And since 2002, so there have been 10 Switek novels since 2002. So it's sort of now like every other book is a Jack Switek novel. This book has, and I disagreed with my publisher on this strongly. They wanted to market it as ripped from the headlines. And they overuse that. You know, there's the show Law and Order, which uses that, right? Okay, ripped from the headlines. And it really is. It's like you read yesterday's newspaper and then that's the plot. I don't think of that as what I do. What I do is I kind of look at what's going on in the world and think about tomorrow's headline. For example, in 1998, I wrote a novel called The Abduction, which was the story of the first presidential election in this country where neither candidate was a white male. It was a black man running for president against a white woman. And basically, this was 1998. So the reviews were sort of like this: great book, but man, readers are really going to have to suspend disbelief if they're going to accept the premise of a black man running against a white woman. Well, 10 years later, we had the whole Hillary-Obama thing, right? So, so what I think of myself as doing is, if it's ripped from any headline, it's ripped from tomorrow's headline. And that's the way I think of Black Horizon, because they are drilling for oil off Cuba's shores. And with or without the U.S. blessing, it's going to continue. And as you'll see as I go through the talk, there are eerie similarities to the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe, but there are other factors that overlay this whole situation that make it much more dangerous and make for a very exciting plot. First, though, it's been sort of an exciting little tour of adventure for me with the tour on this. We already got to go to New York City for the launch of the book. The book launched on March the 4th. So this is the morning of March the 4th. The whole troops descended on my wife, Kaylee, and Ainsley, and poor Ryan is in 9th grade, so he couldn't skip school. So he couldn't go. So we went to NBC Studios for the Morning Joe taping, and that's them on the set. This was after we were in the green room, right, Ainsley? Yeah. How was the food in the green room? Yummy. Yeah, really good, huh? Yep. She was like my publicist. She was snapping pictures, right? I was? Yeah. Yeah, you even Instagrammed. Oh, yeah. Yeah? What was the handle for the Instagram? My dad's on TV, yeah. So that was great. And then that was on the set. We, Mike Barnacle and Tom Roberts did the interview this time, it's taped. So I don't know when it's going to air, but it'll be soon. So if you want to find out, check my Facebook page, and I'll let you know as soon as they'll probably tell me Monday. I'm guessing it'll be Monday or Tuesday of this week. It's been a busy news week. So they've kind of held it longer than they normally would. But they taped James Patterson also, so I don't feel so bad. So, but this was my second time on Morning Joe. Last year, I was there talking about blood money, and Joe Scarborough did the interview. And his final question to me, sort of like the throwaway question, was, okay, so what's the next book about? And at that point, I had just read Senator Bob Graham's report to the president on the National Commission. He was co-chair of the National Commission on the Deepwater Horizon spill. And at about page 254 of the most thorough report and comprehensive report you can ever imagine, there was a paragraph and a half that asked this question. You know, okay, Deepwater Horizon was bad enough with U.S. law applying, with U.S. safety standards in place, but be aware that they are drilling for oil in Cuba, and we have no treaty with that country, let alone diplomatic relations of any kind. So this could be a real problem if there were an oil spill in Cuban water. So I said that to, I was really just getting into it at that point. And Joe Scarborough, of course, is from Pensacola, so he was kind of like really intrigued by this. He's like, oh God, you got to come back and talk about that when that book is finished. Because he had walked the beaches. Pensacola was really, I mean, they barely missed horrendous consequences from that. Anyway, I said that, and when it aired, 10 minutes later, a woman named Gwen Keenan, who is the director of Office of Emergency Response from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, she sends me this email and says, that book that you just told Joe Scarborough about is the U.S. Coast Guard and ours worst nightmare. And nobody's talking about it. And so she wanted to get with me on this because she figured, okay, even if it's some guy who makes up stories for a living, if he's going to write a book about this real life problem, I want it to be accurate and I want it to be out there, and we need to get people thinking about this. So we met several times after that and talked and corresponded, and she gave me a lot of great information beyond the report. And one of the most comprehensive things at the time, I'm sure there's been other things written, but the Council for Foreign Relations is a think tank. In fact, former Senator Bob Graham is a member of Council of Foreign Relations and recently traveled to Cuba on this subject. But there was a policy memorandum written by a captain in the U.S. Coast Guard, which I think really kind of summed it up. Cuba will drill for oil in its territorial waters with or without the blessing of the United States. Without taking precautions, the United States risks a second Deepwater Horizon, this time from Cuba. So that's written by a U.S. Coast Guard captain. So the premise of this novel is clearly rooted in, as I say, tomorrow's headlines. But when I say tomorrow's headlines, I don't mean, way distant future. And this is something that could be literally around the corner. These were taken from, I didn't give attribution here, but this is, Senator Graham was interviewed after he came back from Cuba recently. And that was his conclusion, was that the state-owned oil company is aggressively pursuing plans to drill offshore. And there's a lot of oil there. I mean, there's no dispute about it. Cuba claims it's like 20 billion barrels. But when I say 5.5 billion, that's what the U.S. estimates. So that's probably a solid estimate and perhaps a conservative estimate about what we're talking about there, and trillions of barrels of natural gas. The first well was drilled just 56 miles from Key West. That's Cuban waters. When I say Cuban waters, it's still it's very, very close to home, closer to Key West than to Havana. And interestingly, the eerie parallel here is the BP, the Maricondo well, was just 48 miles from shore. BP's well was 5,000 feet deep. Not the well itself was much deeper than that, but the waters above the well were 5,000 feet of water. They're drilling between 5,000 and 12,000 feet, or targeting areas much deeper than that. And there's a lot of other things that contribute just to the problem, in the sense that take the fact that we don't have any relations with Cuba out of it. The waters in the Gulf are moving, are flat. I'm sorry. The waters where we're drilling in Cuba are choppier. It's a tougher operation to begin with. Even if you have the top-notch equipment, it's a tougher operation than it was even in the Gulf. So you overlay all of that, the embargo, right? Which everybody here knows about the embargo, because you probably all know somebody who's been to Cuba, probably many of them illegally, because that's sort of, everybody kind of has that friend who wants to just sort of bring back the cigars or whatever it is. But I actually didn't go to Cuba to research this, but and here's why. I mean, we have a trade embargo with Cuba. Okay, I mean, you can go to jail. I mean, many people aren't aware of that, I guess, because it seems like every week I'm running into somebody saying, "Oh yeah, great trip, no problem." I'm like, "Well, dude, maybe you've got a bigger problem than you think." So, so you have the trade embargo in place, which complicates, obviously, the whole oil operation there. By the way, I didn't put this in the book, but I always kind of love the little research tidbits you find out. It was this is folklore. I don't know if it's true or not, but supposedly President Kennedy ordered 1,200 Cuban cigars the day before the embargo went into effect in 1963. So, but basically, so this is the premise of my novel, and it's really all true. Okay, is the rig has to be built or had to be built in China, in this case, because you can't have a U.S. rig, can't have more than 10% U.S. parts on it. So this one was built in China. They brought it all the way across the ocean. It's the only there's only one rig really that's big enough to drill for oil and that complies with the drill for oil in Cuban waters this deep, and that complies with the U.S. trade embargo. So I have a Chinese rig in my novel. I have a Russian drilling company that's sort of playing the role of Halliburton, I guess, would be sort of that would be the role that Halliburton played in the Deepwater Horizon. They cemented the well to make sure they'd maintain the integrity of the well as they were drilling. And the two largest state-owned Russian companies, that's a fact. They actually are. And the Russians now are leading the way with exploration in Cuba. And I put on top of that, because when I actually started writing, I think Hugo Chavez was still alive. So I thought, okay, who would be, I would put Venezuela in there. Venezuela and Cuba, of course, are very close allies. And so I had a Venezuelan oil company, but you can sort of overlay that. It could be Angola, it could be Vietnam, could be any number of countries that could play that role. And of course, it's all under a leasehold from Cuba. So, you know, not exactly our four closest friends, drilling 50 miles away from Key West. And then, this is also from the Council of Foreign Relations, which I thought maybe very thoughtful report, but I thought this might have been the understatement of the year. Because Repsol is the Spanish company, and they were the first ones to lead a consortium that was drilling in Cuba, and they drilled in Cuban waters, and they were 56 miles. They ended up pulling out. But the report says that Repsol has been forthcoming in disclosing its spill response plans to U.S. authorities and allowing them to inspect the drilling rig. And the reason that's important is because we don't have any authority there. We can't demand to see what their standards are. We don't, the Pollution Control Acts and so forth, Clean Air Act, none of that, Clean Water Act, I'm sorry, doesn't apply in these territories. And then it goes on to say, but the Russian and Chinese companies that are already negotiating with Cuba to lease acreage might not be as cooperative. So there's the, you think, okay, maybe not. So the other effect of this is, and this is also a fact, was that, well, I say it's a fact. It was reported in the Cuban Standard and the Moscow Times. But I don't know. I'm not going to vouch for it. But they did report that in June, whatever that is, not that long ago, 7-8 months, there was a Russian exploratory drilling was cut short due to safety concerns over the blowout preventer. Now that's a blowout preventer. That is, and of that massive rig that I showed you the picture of, this is the only part that actually was U.S. manufactured on the Scarabeo 8, which was the rig that they're putting there. So they had concerns over the very piece of equipment that was at issue in Deepwater Horizon. So not good. And the other problem with this is that because the blowout preventer is on this rig is U.S. manufactured, they can't get replacement parts. So what do you think they're going to? What are they going to rig up if some problem? I mean, think about it. You're spending $500,000 a day to lease this rig. If you're the Russian oil company or whatever it is, $500,000 a day, and you can't get replacement parts because it's a U.S. manufactured blowout preventer, and the embargo prohibits you from getting replacement parts. So, okay, $500,000 a day. We don't have the replacement parts. Well, let's get out the Volvo or engine or something and see what we can rig up from there to make this thing work again. it's got disaster spelled all over it. So, what if something went wrong? When I first started reaching, this wasn't actually an easy question to determine, because there were opinions who went both ways. There were those who said the Gulf Stream would carry the oil out to sea and it wouldn't hit Florida. That doesn't seem to be what anybody is thinking anymore, is that it would impact Florida. The experts have sort of, my understanding is that they've come to pretty much a consensus on that Florida would certainly be impacted, because especially as the exploration moves farther west in the Cuban waters, because the Gulf Stream would then carry it probably the direct hit area, as best as I could ascertain, would be, the Keys kind of are like an elbow kind of, right? So right at that elbow, Marathon and on up would be very, very vulnerable. The estimates seem to be around 6 to 10 days is how long it would take. So that's not a long time to react. Think it took, 87 days for them to cap the Deepwater Horizon blowout. And in 6 to 10 days, the oil would be on U.S. shore. There's lots of things that, one of the things you have to decide to do when you're writing a novel like this is what's really going to go in the book and what's going to be out of the book. So a lot of the things I'm sharing with you didn't really make it into the plot, but I think it's an important background for the story. So the only effective response, shouldn't say only, probably the only effective response to a spill of this magnitude would be dispersants. That's what the experts told me. And the thing that was scary about this, and I didn't make this up, is that if you don't apply these dispersants near the source within 4 days of the spill, you might as well not apply them. You can't do, it would render all of these sort of modern technologies, containment booms and so forth, ineffective if you don't. And go back to the other slide, I'm not going to go back, but it's basically, you've got oil coming at 6 to 10 days, you've got 4 days is your real deadline, right? Even though 6 to 10 days doesn't sound like very much time, but it's really 4 days. Because if we don't get to the source and apply these dispersants within 4 days, it's sort of game over. How would Cuba apply these dispersants? Okay, so there's a Jose Piñon, who former oil executive for Amoco Latin America, has done a lot of research on this. Jorge Piñon, sorry, and his estimate is that Cuba has about 5% of the resources it needs to respond to a spill of this magnitude. And the Washington Post reported that Cuba's plans on how to spread the dispersants was to retrofit and deploy aging crop dusters from Cuban farms to dump the dispersants. So I try to look for humor in anything, but so when I thought of that, I thought of, is anybody under 35 who knows who that I said under 35. Oh, you're under 35. Yeah, okay. Oh, good. Yeah. No? All right, I'll go higher. Anybody under 40 know who that is? Okay, great. But that's sort of the great scene. For those of you who are even, beyond those years and don't recognize Cary Grant, it's what? North by Northwest. Yes, the crop duster scene. Well, anyway, that's how they're going to disperse apply the dispersants. Cuba can't get what it needs. Let's assume they even wanted it. U.S. companies, U.S. Coast Guard couldn't deploy there without violating the embargo. U.S. oil companies couldn't, however you feel about oil companies, they do have expertise in this area that you would want brought to bear on a spill like this. They couldn't do it. They couldn't. The remotely operated submersibles, other technologies, all of that they used, feverishly to try to stem the flow of the oil in the Gulf. They can't do it, and Cuba doesn't have it. They don't have a submarine that they can deploy there. And this was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Was when that's called a capping stack, which is what finally was put on the flow of the oil to stop it in the Gulf. Was that even if you could get one to them, which, by the way, I wasn't able to confirm this, but I was actually told that right now the closest one is in Scotland. If they needed to bring one to an oil spill, the closest one that complies with the embargo would be all the way from Scotland, which would take a week to get there. But even if it got there, there isn't a crane big enough in Cuba to lift that monster off of a ship safely and put it into place. So lots of really just a bad situation. So what would be the impact? There I was having a great day out in Florida Bay and hearing the parade of horribles, that everything that would happen if the oil were to get through Florida's Keys on into the Florida Everglades, Florida Bay, and potentially up to, seep back into the Everglades where 7 million Floridians get their drinking water from, the $57 billion tourist industry, fisheries, wildlife. I mean, it's just, you can go on and on. Who's going to be accountable, right? Okay. So, yeah, that's Putin and Raul Castro. Okay, so, the government came down pretty hard on BP and the other players. All three of them, Transocean, Halliburton, BP, all ended up pleading guilty to criminal charges. BP ended up paying like $40 billion between the civil lawsuits and the fines and so forth. Who really? I don't think so. I don't think that as I say, I don't think Putin and Castro are losing any sleep, any thought of any sort of consequences from the U.S. If something goes wrong here. So here was the hard part, though, getting back to the novel anyway. Okay, so I've got all this great research and all this great background of of an international crisis. Think about it. I mean, you've got think of the political back channels that would be going on. And I thought of making this a political thriller. I mean, and it could have easily been just a White House-driven political thriller. Imagine Cuba saying, okay, oh, oops, we spilled the oil. Great. U.S., we want your help. Drop the embargo. No problem. Drop the trade embargo and you can come in. But until that happens, you are a hostile invader and we got this under control. That's a worst case scenario. You could imagine Putin now with everything that's going on in Russia, right? So he's in control of the oil operations there. The West's response is to try to loosen his grasp on Ukrainian natural gas. So his answer, of course, is, what would you think? He'll be, well, fine, You think you're going to strangle me out of the Ukraine by threatening to take away my natural gas, control of natural gas? I'll go to Cuba and do it in your backyard. So there's all kinds of political kind of connotations to this. But I decided I wasn't going to write that. Well, I did, kind of. It's great. It's in there. A lot of plot in this story. But I remember, this is the cover of the Deepwater, the Presidential Commission headed by former Senator and Governor Graham, which I read. And that was very important to note that book is dedicated to the 11 men who lost their lives in that. And you can talk about the environmental damages, and that's sort of all we've talked about in the news anyway, since this happened. Was BP fined for this, BP found negligent of that, but it's not that we forget that 11 people lost their lives, but it becomes swallowed up by the other posturing and stories and corporate sort of intrigue that you might have with this. So I decided, I want to keep this story as just the same way that Report kind of kept its heart and soul about safety and the loss of life here, as well as the environment. I decided, okay, that's sort of going to be the heart and soul, and that's how I got Jack involved. Because Jack doesn't work in the White House, and unlike most, not going to say most, but unlike some thriller writers, it's like you might read one book and the character's like a hotshot lawyer, and then you read the next book and suddenly you found out that he was going to be a brain surgeon, so he actually knows a lot about brain surgery, in the next novel, so or whatever. And I don't do that. I mean, I keep Jack's his character development is what really drives the series. And everything that he does is something in keeping with what Jack would do, and he doesn't suddenly have this unknown skill and connection. So I decided, well, Jack could certainly. There were, all of these, the victims' families all filed wrongful death suits. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, that would be a really, really interesting case for Jack to get involved in. And so the story opens up with Jack's on his honeymoon, finds out about this oil spill. They sort of, they're in the Keys, and there is a young, now a young widow. She's Cuban American. She came to this country without her husband, which is, by the way, a very believable scenario, because even though Cuba has somewhat, at least in theory, relaxed travel standards for Cuban nationals, if you happen to be married to a guy who was educated in Cuba and is a very talented engineer, talented enough to work on an oil rig in an industry that is now very, very important to Cuba, they ain't going to let him out. So the storyline is basically she got out of Cuba, he didn't, and he's killed on the rig. And she sees Jack and decides, I want to sue the Russian oil company the same way everybody sued Halliburton, Transocean, and BP. I want to sue the Russian company. I want to sue the Chinese company. I want to sue the Venezuelan company. I want to sue the Cuban company. And it's a complicated case, which is what Jack likes to take on. So, and of course, at the heart of Jack's case is proving what went wrong on that rig. And you can imagine what a case against those adversaries would be like, trying to establish what went wrong, which only scratches the surface of what everyone would have to go through. I mean, how would Joe Stonecrabs on the beach, file a claim against Cuba and Venezuela and China for the economic impact of this? So it's a timely story, and I think a really interesting addition to the Jack Switek series. What's next? Anything? Oh, I went the wrong way. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that one of the fun things I get to do as a writer, everybody wants to be in the book. Trust me, you really don't want to be in the book. But everybody thinks they want to be in the book, and I have two people in the audience, Connie and Tom, who've actually been in the book. Maybe, yeah, Ainsley has. Ainsley got in for free, though. But the way it works is that for charity, I will name a character after you, and sometimes, if you're interesting enough, as both, I still get letters on Tom and Connie. When am I going to bring them back? And it's raised over $50,000 for charities. And this one was for St. Thomas Episcopal Parish School. And Jim Murphy, I don't know if the Murphys are here tonight. Maybe they're not. But anyway, they're not. So I won't embarrass them. But they won the auction, so they're in the book. And Jim Murphy is a nice guy in the book. What's interesting, you'd be surprised, is most people want to be the villain. Yeah. So I wanted to leave time for questions. And if any of you want to go get a drink or whatever, that's fine. I'm not offended by that. I know you've been sitting for a while here, and I appreciate your patience. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, even in the real life, don't you think the Canadians can help out if there were such a disaster?
You have to, boy, the first question has to be the one thing I really didn't think about there. Now, you know? And I think the only way, actually, I did bring the Canadians into the story because but in a different way, the rig is hit by a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, which is how it sinks, which is, could easily happen. But the storm hit Cuba as a Category 3 or 4 or before it crossed over into the Straits. So the only Canadian connection in the story has to do with, and there are a lot of ham radio operators out of Canada who kind of control the airwaves with Cuba. So maybe they could, but I don't think anybody can solve this problem in the time frame that I articulated, which is 6 to 10 days of oil on our shores and 4 days to apply the dispersants. I mean, it's too complicated I can't imagine.
Well, we couldn't even do it here.
Right, right.
But I was just thinking about since they had
Yep.
relations.
Yeah.
Do have oil companies.
Yeah, I think it would take more than that, I think it takes advanced planning and coordination on this, and I could talk about that for much longer than people would be willing to listen to at this point, because it's interesting because I've taken on pretty serious topics in most of my books. The first book was the death penalty. I took pride in the fact that you could read The Pardon and you would never be able to guess where I stand on the death penalty. I don't like books that preach. But I will say if you read Black Horizon, you'll pretty much understand. I don't think you'll be able to guess where I stand on offshore drilling, but you surely will be able to understand where I stand on offshore drilling by the Chinese, the Russians, and the Cubans 50 miles from Key West. Yeah.
Jim, you got to speak to the Coast Guard, and there's obviously been a report. The embargo is obviously a problem, but I mean, are they just kind of standing there wringing their hands going, there'll be nothing we can do?
No, there are efforts at conferences going on and so forth, trying to reach some. There are some companies, U.S. companies, that are licensed, specially licensed, to, for example, to provide dispersants to Cuba and so forth, but they're not actually licensed to go there and apply them. So there's been some steps made towards improving the situation, but there's a long way to go, a very long way to go to get us in a state of preparedness and readiness for a disaster of this magnitude. No, we're nowhere near that. But it's surprising to me that even today, when big news today, basically. But you didn't hear about it because all the news is talking about is the lost airplane, right? And I think BP is a genius, in their marketing or publicity department, whatever it is. They announced this morning that the 4-year ban on offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico is over by agreement. They've reached an agreement with the EPA, and so now BP can drill again. Now, how many people knew that? Hardly anybody. A handful, not less than a handful. Okay, so that was just great timing. I could just see people sitting in some office somewhere and saying, wow, let's announce this today. We got Russia going on, invading Crimea, or Ukraine, and we got this lost airplane thing. It's like, let's announce our agreement with the EPA, So, and there was some outrage over it expressed, but I'm looking at that news and I'm thinking, well, man, they're going to be all over BP, right? All these conditions and so forth, and so there is outrage over that, but the bigger danger is that 50 miles from Key West, there's absolutely no oversight, from the U.S. over what the Russians are doing. So, yeah.
How long has the drilling been going on, and what is the estimate of how long it will continue into the future? What's the life of that well?
Well, first of all, it's exploratory drilling, right? So there has not yet been an active well in the sense that they're drawing out commercial quantities. They believe they are there. The Spaniards pulled out, I think, in 2012. Repsol pulled out, having determined that they couldn't get oil out in commercial quantities. But now, the fact-finding mission that Senator Graham just did in January reported they're going back at it aggressively. They've identified, I think, 10 different blocks that they're going to start drilling in. So, if they hit oil, it will be, there's I mean, as long as an oil well remains active, I mean, given the cost, I don't think they're going to do it, they're not going to cut anything short, especially with Cuba, because I think, they perceive this as sort of their ticket out of poverty, right? If they can become an oil country. So, right. So, but I mean, I don't fancy myself the authority on this. There are people who know more about this than I did, but I did learn enough to write a very entertaining novel, which I'll be happy to sign for you after the signing. So, but thank you for coming. Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. For those of you watching online, don't forget you can call and order your book. We'll have Jim sign it for you. As far as those of you here, before you buy your book, if you could fold your chairs when you get up, I've got all of Jim's books behind the counter. He'll sign them right here. Thank you all so much for coming.